So you're there with your television, you just turned into HDR mode, and maybe you're watching Apple TV or through the apps on your television or just on your video gaming consoles or whatever. HDR switches on, and the first thing you think of is like, whoa, colors just got really bad, wonky, black levels are raised and they look pale. What is happening? I'm noticing more grain and the shadows that weren't there before. What just happened? Today I'll be unpacking all that stuff. So subscribe if you like content like this, smack a like on this video, and let's dive right into it without wasting any of your time. So modern cameras, right, are capable of so much more than old, outdated cameras we grew up with when we were children. But the problem is the science around what makes an image for the television world has not changed past that point when we were kids, some, 30, 40 years ago and maybe even more. Okay, but here's the thing. That's what the whole dynamic range thing that people are hyping up is all about. See, the difference between the darkest black and the brightest white, that is dynamic range. And what's considered a high dynamic range is something that can see slightly more black levels but still maintain good white purity. And then of course you have all your midtones in the middle. Now what this means in English is that you have a more lifelike realistic image. Because when you walk outside, clouds aren't clipping and overexposed, right? Usually you can see details in clouds. Black levels aren't crushed and you can't make out the detail in some black objects. That's not a thing. So the goal has always been to move away from technology that was antiquated and get us more into the 21st century. Now here's the problem though. Modern cameras all have an HDR profile. And it's called either log, S-log, HLG, and you can shoot in these profiles and convert that dynamic range to SDR. And 9 times out of 10, that's what happens in every cinematic production. And they need post-processing software to edit their film so that you can see the true nature of the film. This has been going on for a very, very, very long time, and people are abusing the lack of consumer knowledge to basically the video industry. And I'm here to tell you that you don't have to sit there and guess and second guess. You're not crazy. They're playing tricks on you. What they're basically doing is raising the black levels beyond what the director intended, because it wasn't natively shot in such a way where you can ramp up the black levels or the brightness of those black levels like HDR likes to do. Let's be clear, HDR basically acts like a brightness booster, and in doing so, it elevates those shadows or lifts the black levels to be brighter. And that, in some cases, makes it closer to the color gray instead of black. Because as we know about color volume, the brighter something is, the more we add detail into the color, giving it more shades of color that it didn't have before. But that's true for every color, including black. You raise that brightness, you're adding in grain now, right? Especially something that has native film grain as a stylistic look, maybe a darker film that was supposed to look dark. Those things can break relatively easily. Now, again, when I talk about modern cameras in the log formats, the HLG formats, and the conversion process to turn those high dynamic range points into something that we can see on our SDR displays, you have to understand that that conversion process is just changing it so that you can view it on an 8-bit television that doesn't swap out your gamma formats and do all this wonky stuff. But the dynamic range stays. Let me say that again. The dynamic range will never change with how it was shot. For example, if I'm shooting this video like now at a focal length of f1.4 and the background's all blurry, that's never going to change just simply because I go into HDR. These kinds of rules of photography and videography hold true across your content. And the relevancy is that now you can understand why I call it a scam. It is truly a scam when you have a camera that was capable of shooting 15 to 17 stops of dynamic range, capture all 15 to 17 stops of dynamic range, introduce that into an SDR format so you can watch it regularly in 8-bit, and then you have a television that's capable of 2000 nits in some cases, which means you can get the brightness overhead, you can see all the details, and the black levels aren't crushing either, right? You're seeing the details where you want. You don't have a problem with that. And 9 times out of 10, you can adjust things when you don't have those details. So now we're entering an age where they are pretending like SDR doesn't have the capability to be adjusted properly, and now all you need is HDR. But the problem with HDR is not everything was optimized correctly, and what that looks like for you is the menus being again, pale and completely washed of color because they weren't converted over, and that's just part of the problem. But again, 9 times out of 10, it leads to a heavier workload on your hardware. Usually gaming and TV manufacturers don't allow you to do like 4K, 120 hertz, HDR, VRR, all at the same time. It's a lot, especially even for video editors. And 9 times out of 10, your favorite YouTubers won't even put their videos up in HDR every single video because it's a lot to do. Especially when we know we can just sit there and record in an HDR format and convert it to SDR, and you see all of the dynamic range, and our content still looks the way we intend it to, with the darkest darks looking correct and the brightest brights looking correct, showing the optimal amount of detail. Now, to be clear, just so I'm not confusing everybody with the dynamic range part, basically human beings can see 24 stops of light, right? From the purest black to the purest white we could possibly see. That is 24 stops of dynamic range. So when I tell you that SDR, for example, has anywhere from 6 to 8 stops of dynamic range, and I tell you that HDR has anywhere from 12 to like maybe upwards of 18 stops of dynamic range on Macs that I've seen at the most expensive level, and on average it's about 14 to 15 stops of dynamic range. Now you're here able to understand what all this means as a full picture, right? Now, remember what I said a second ago. You don't lose the stops of dynamic range just because you took your HDR footage and converted it for an SDR screen. All that means is the color depth, the gamma points of BT1886, but the information that was captured, the light gathered onto the image sensor in a higher dynamic range profile never changes. And people trying to tell you that that will change are lying to you and fundamentally do not understand videography and photography. If you want to know more about this, you can ask some questions down below, but I highly recommend more people look into this because it truly is a scam. You're not crazy. Your image is just basically being lifted beyond its normal point, and there's really no need for it because 9 times out of 10, the videos that you are watching on anything, whether it's YouTube through creators with our new Sony cameras or Canon cameras, or it's a cinematic camera in Hollywood, we all usually are using some form of a log profile to extend our dynamic range, giving us more, and in turn giving you better dynamic range. So again, this whole is SDR still viable? Should we run to HDR? You do not need HDR. Turn it off. It is pointless. Just adjust and calibrate your SDR with BT2020 and wider color gamut. Extend the color space and adjust those colors down. And I promise you, you start comparing to HDR, you'll start to notice what I'm talking about. You're not going to see the advertisements that they show you where they say, oh, you have no detail in the clouds or you have no detail in your black levels. That is just not right. So hopefully this long-winded video can really help you guys out. And as always, I want to thank you guys so much for watching the #1 brand in honesty. Till the next video, I'll see you guys later.